Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kendra Jason. I'm a sociologist and workplace equity consultant, and I will bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. On this podcast, I challenge you to think about work. Why? Because in America, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work? And I mean all types of work: women's work, essential work, retirement, being your own boss, how to handle your boss, and so much more. Please subscribe and share the Jobs and Work with Work for Change podcast. You can learn more about my consultancy that supports this podcast at work4changellc.com. Hello, and welcome to episode 43 of the Jobs and Work with Work for Change podcast. I am so excited because we're back with conversations with Kris and Kendra. So, hey, Kris, how you doing?
Hey, happy to be back. Excited to have our conversation today.
Yeah, so I'll start out by saying it is July. So let me give a happy belated, happy Juneteenth, a happy belated, happy 4th of July to everyone. Kris and I have been vacationing and traveling just like everyone else. So we are glad to be back on this platform with you. And we want to talk about something that actually has been a little bit in the news lately. And actually one of our previous clients had brought it to our attention, and we had a conversation with that client. And so we thought it would be a great topic to bring up with you. And what we want to talk about is diversity training backlash, or the fear of diversity training backlash. And so basically what this is when a organization, a company hires someone or engages in diversity training. And during or after that diversity training, it could be immediate or it can be a few months or a few weeks later, there is some type of backlash from the employees who took that training. It could be things more overt, like complaining. It could be failed partnerships and collaborations. It could be frustrations expressed to management and things of that nature. And so we really want to talk about this because diversity training is not embraced by everyone, right? You can literally Google diversity training backlash or by diversity training retaliation, and you'll come up with a series of blogs, even some academic articles that has written about this. A lot of the blogs really talk about ways that you can avoid diversity training backlash, or some of them even talk about why diversity efforts fail. You can go through our last year, Kris and I even had a podcast on why diversity efforts fail ourselves. So please check that out. But I wanted to start out and really just kind of lay out what this is, because as the rumblings of diversity training backlash gets out through the media, through conversations across organizations, it is actually instilling some hesitancy and some fear in organizations and workplaces moving forward with the diversity training that they so desperately need. So I'm gonna pause right there. Kris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, as you were talking about it, for listeners and watchers who might need like a verbal linguistic cue as to what we're referencing, I think about the things like that have been said about equity efforts that could, quote, implode us as an organization, or the organization or the company is going to eat itself from the inside out. Those are two phrases that I've heard regularly over the last 15 years about efforts to really tackle equity. So a question that I think we're going to float around today is, a lot of organizations and companies go through overhauls, go through change, whether it's leadership, whether it's in visioning, marketing. What makes addressing equity different? Because it's a change, right? It's a shift, it's a change. And I think that gets at the root of the why equity work is so important, why it's transformative. There's a risk involved. It's not safe, right? We talked a little bit earlier as we prepared for this conversation that not addressing equity is a way to just maintain the status quo, to keep things humming along the way that they've always been done. So what makes equity work, raise some sort of eyebrows or get people on guard, and their fear is that what happens when we're not maintaining the status quo? And there is risk in that. That's the point.
Yeah.
Right. So as we get to, as we edge into this conversation, I have some thoughts about what I'm just thinking of as like protective factors that can help mitigate, like what are some supports organizations and companies want to have in place to safeguard against the eating yourself from the inside out or imploding and things like that. So yeah, I have some thoughts about things that companies can do to kind of safeguard against that.
So number one, Kris, you must be reading my notes. And number two, isn't it just like Kris said, to be thinking solution oriented at the top of the conversation, right? So, I was saying you read in my notes because one thing that I wrote down in preparation for this conversation is what type of growth is not risky for an organization, right? And it goes way back. One thing that Kris and I say in our workshops and our training is, be careful about the adjectives that you put in front of words like diversity training or equity, right? It's not a tough conversation. It's not a controversial conversation. It's just a conversation, right? Or it's just a equity program. It's not a controversial program. How you frame what you're doing really like permeates through the organization as to how they're going to receive it. And so, I was thinking too, while you we're talking, Kris, when companies overhaul their software, right? Like if you're an academic, we're going from Blackboard to Canvas. That's an aggravation. You get so much retaliation. People hold on to those previous versions for as long as they possibly can.
I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
Right. And that is a form of resistance, right? That is a form of backlash as well, right? When you have to go through work retreats, people don't like those either. You get backlash and retaliation from those things as well. But you know what? You still have those retreats because it's really important to build teamwork, to build camaraderie, to learn things as a group. Right? It's really important with technology to bring your organization into the newest technology, right? So that you can be on par with your competitors and what your clients need. So it's the same thing with equity training. And so one thing that we want to relay to you all is that equity training does not have any backlash, any more serious or any more controversial or any more retaliatory than any other organizational change or training or improvement that you want to make. So when you put it in that category as controversial or tough or, something that's going to put you in a compromising position, that's when we ask you as an employer, as a manager, as an individual to be really self-reflective about what are you really feeling anxious about, right? Because, what we do know and what has been proven across the board is that diversifying your teams is good for productivity, is good for workplace culture. Now, before Kris gets to the solutions, this is sort of part of the solutions, there is some truth to diversity efforts failing and diversity training failing. And there are a lot of reasons that go into that. A couple of reasons is really thinking about how you have prepped your organization for that training, right? Or for that shift, right? And you have to start somewhere. There are some organizations that are supremely racist, right? There are some organizations that are just white supremacist institutions like a university or a bank or a hospital. These are bureaucratic organizations are white supremacists by nature. And so, there's a starting place for everyone. And so the thing is that you really have to be, I guess this is solutions, Kris. You really have to be mindful about who you bring into that organization to do the training, if they are meeting your need, if they are customizing their training to what your employees need, to what improvements your culture needs to make. All right. So I'm gonna pause there because I know Kris has a lot to add.
Yeah, I mean, like with any sort of organizational change that we've been referencing, the process really matters. Like how you engage in equity work. Just saying, look at we're going to do it and feel good about doing it. We're big advocates of developing relationships and partnerships as you go through this with outside consultants, if that's the route you decide to do, right? So you can, we've seen the progression of, with clients that we've worked with, where they've started out and then 6 months later, 12 months later, they refer back to where they were at the beginning. We're big advocates of, if you're going to do this work, which you should, that you do it in a thoughtful way and that it's slow moving. And we say all the time, none of these problems surfaced overnight. They're not going to be remedied overnight. The point is to move forward. And one of the things that we've discovered and we've heard, not only from our observations, as being social scientists, but we've heard our clients have aha moments. Things like, what we realize now that we weren't ready, last year or 5 years ago, is that we need to be students again. So this fits into part of the solution piece, is like, when we're professionals in our job and we're executive directors and we're CEOs and we're the boss, we're the supervisor, we're not used to being humbled by not knowing much about what we're doing in a workplace context. And now you're around your peers, your people you might be supervising, and you have to show that you really don't know much about white supremacy or about white saviorism or about poverty. That's a humbling experience. So, getting comfortable, you have to get comfortable with things that we don't necessarily associate with work, like being comfortable being a student again, not knowing much about what is in front of you, being comfortable not knowing the outcome, right? Not knowing, sometimes we say trust the process. You don't necessarily know the definitive outcome yet, but you're going to figure it out as you get there. And the other thing, so being comfortable being a student again, being comfortable not knowing the outcome, but knowing that you're moving forward, and being comfortable being wrong. Which is a part of white dominant culture, right? It's like being the expert, having to have all the answers, and being uncomfortable being wrong. So all of that, it's like letting that guard down and being comfortable with all of those challenges, but when you are comfortable with that, that's when progress happens. And we've seen executive directors in the same space as, or the leadership team in the same space as the staff that they lead over or lead with, have these moments where they have to be vulnerable. And that's where real change happens. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Kendra.
Yes. Another thing I was thinking too is, one of the examples, like if you look on the blogs, for example, on why diversity efforts fail, one common example that they give is, you diversify your teams because that's what you're supposed to do. And then the teams fall apart because there's no commonality and people, working together that they, really can't jive with or whatever. And so that effort fails, right? Now, we know that's oversimplifying the problem, and there's a lot of prep work and process work that you can do to avoid, the failing in that matter. But let's just say that they do fail, right? My question to you is, so everything that you try is successful? Right? As an organization, as a workplace, you learn from your mistakes. You learn from failures. So again, why is it? This is a question for self-reflection. Why is it when you're, something that you try that was inspired out of diversity training or, equity training, if that doesn't go the way you think it should go immediately, then it's a fail and you throw it out, you throw it out the window. That's just not the way workplaces work. Right? If that was any other situation, in your regular work process, and you've invested as much money, because let's be honest, these trainings, these external consultants cost money, taking on learning modules, if you want to buy software for diversity training, those things cost money. They're a high investment, right? So at what other time do you take a investment such as diversity training, and as soon as something doesn't work, one factor or two factors, you throw it out the window? That's not the way that you are adaptable, flexible, and you learn from your mistakes as an organization. So again, I just really want to push back on that fear and that hesitancy around failure of diversity efforts, and just really help you remember you're still a manager, right? And so another thing that I often talk to managers, about is that in many cases, you are a good, or excellent manager when it comes to the everyday operations of your organization, right? However, when the term equity or diversity gets thrown in there, it's like all of your, knowledge base and wherewithal of how to manage a meeting, how to facilitate a conversation, which are like basic principles. It's like you lose them. You don't know what to do, because the topic is equity. Now, you as a manager, and you as a facilitator, and you as an organizer, those things don't go out the window. You use those same skills with a different topic. So again, it's just, there is a lot of emotional, and I don't know what another word is. There's a lot of sentiment tied to equity and diversity, and especially for white people. If you feel like you're not really trained in this, or you're not really knowledgeable, or you don't know what to do, sometimes it causes white people or people in management positions to kind of clam up and not just be the good managers that they always are. Okay, so I'll just say, and I'll pass it over to Kris, is that when you think about these diversity failures or something that doesn't work out, treat it like you would treat any other organizational process. Learn from that mistake, see where you need to regroup, see where you need to change things, and then try it again.
Yeah. Thank you, Kendra. Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking, like, because this can go really deep into just like white fear and white avoidance. Like those are those things that, white leadership and white leaders and white culture has so many generations of being able to, having fear of Black and brown people, and being able to take that fear and then just avoid interacting with Black and brown people, right? I mean, if we think about like segregation and hyper segregation. So the workplace is a place where you cannot avoid these conversations, right? Especially if you're addressing equity work. Yeah. So I think about the sort of like, where does it come from? It comes from this real deep inclination and desire to avoid that which we don't understand or that we're uncomfortable with, and that's where the avoidance comes in, of not wanting to do it, not wanting, okay, this didn't work, let's shut that box. We tried it. We tried to do it, just didn't work. And I think you bring up an excellent point about why do we see that as different than any other effort, like, migrating to a different platform online or something like that, or changing servers or changing the office, the physical office. Some places that creates a huge change. Yeah. Right. And so, what we're trying to do is encourage you to put it in that same space as organizational change. We talk a lot about language. So instead of saying like difficult conversation, as soon as you say things like difficult conversation or challenging, right? I mean, yes, they can be challenging in some ways if you've never had a conversation about it. So on a basic level, some of these words are just what we use to describe our experiences. But to frame it as, one of the suggestions we say, if you're going to give it an adjective and not just conversations, you can say a transformative conversation to get you in the space of change rather than just recoiling. Like you said, this clam up, this tendency to kind of recoil and close up and clench your fists and not engage. Yeah. And that's something that I think runs really deep historically too.
And again, like what other topic do you bring to your meetings, your staff meetings, that you say, we're going to have a difficult conversation, we're going to have a challenging conversation? And I'll give you some insight, especially, this is a brown person, a Black person talking to white people, right? I say, difficult for who? When you start out a conversation about race or race inequality or anti-Black racism, and you say, this is a challenging conversation, my first thought is, challenging for who? Because I've been dying to have this conversation, right? I've been ready to have this conversation. But for a white person, and typically white people are in, positions of leadership and in a lot of organizations, when they start out that conversation about something that's really meaningful to me that I need, and you say off the bat, this is difficult, challenging, or controversial for you.
Yeah.
That's where the privilege and the blindness comes from, right? And so, if you did not know that, or you did not have that insight, just know that how you frame those conversations, you may think you're prepping the room so people know to, embrace, this type of conversation. But no, even in saying that in itself is showing white privilege, right? Because what you're doing is you're centering your feelings and your emotions about this topic and ignoring how that same topic, which you literally bring it to the table for the benefit of typically your Black, brown, or women, or non-binary people, to the center. So see how the conversation kind of goes off base when you center your feelings about it. Okay. So another thing I wanted to, say about why diversity efforts fail is that, at Work for Change, we are a workplace equity consultancy. And our approach is to customize every experience that we have. Like, and this is no shade to anyone who has a equity business out there, and you put your slide deck together, and whoever divvies out the money for that slide deck, you do your hour or your 2 hours, and you give every organization the same slide deck, right? It's no shade to those type of people or those type of business models. However, a reason that diversity efforts fail is because cookie cutter approaches are not going to work, because all of your employees are not going to be on the same page. Okay. So one thing that's really annoying and frustrating and aggravating, especially for Black and brown people and women who have been doing this work, is they're at let's say level 8, and you do a diversity training that's all on level 2. Right. And we understand common language, all those kind of things, equity 101. However, to make things more successful, you have to have content that's going to engage everybody in the room. So even if they're at 8, you're giving them something to think about, to ponder at their level of knowledge and activity, just as much as you're giving someone who doesn't even know what the definition of, how is equity different than equality, right? So if you go in with a cookie cutter approach, right, then what happens is that you're going to, by doing that one stroke version, you're going to miss a lot of people. Number one, the higher level people who've been thinking and doing this work, they're going to tune out because, you're tone deaf, you're not hearing their need, and you're ignoring all the work that they've done, because they've probably already given you the tools and resources for that knowledge base in that organization anyway. And then if you start at a higher level, then the people who don't understand the difference between equity and equality, for example, are going to tune out as well, because they don't know what you're talking about, and you're reaching beyond their comprehension. So let's really be honest about, who you're hiring and how they are understanding your organization. So if you hire someone and they don't even do an assessment about what your organization needs, what problems you're having, what challenges you want to get through, what feedback you're getting from your employees, and they just say, oh, we can do something on implicit bias and that's going to solve your problems, that's not going to work.
No, something that Kendra and I really take pride in is meeting clients where they're at. And sometimes that's not a sort of homogeneous thing either. Sometimes, like Kendra said, you may have staff who's more experienced and advanced in doing equity work, and some who are new to it. Maybe you have brand new hires while you're engaging in a 6-month partnership. So part of our job is to bring people into that fold, to be that bridge between those who are more advanced and those who are new to this work. And that's a part of this, is like meeting people where they're at and coming up with solutions and strategies that make sense for our clients. And I can't imagine not having an assessment piece. Like, so much of what we do is informed by getting to know through, small group meetings, through a variety of ways that we spend time, and we dig deep. We ask really big questions. We ask a lot of questions. And part of the question asking that we ask is doing the consulting work.
Yeah.
Clients will say, wow, that's a really good question. We should wrestle with that more in thinking about onboarding, or thinking about an equity lens, and how it informs communication strategies. And just our questions can be a form of our consulting work. And we've had clients say to us at the end, like, we hear your questions. Like, we'll be in a staff meeting and we hear Kendra and Kris in some of the questions they've asked us in our meeting. So just a little plug in for our approach. It's helpful. Yeah.
So Kris, I'm going to give one more piece of advice. And if you have any other solutions or resolutions you want to add before we wrap up, just be thinking about those.
I'll just go one more. Yep. Go ahead.
So, one thing, that goes with the feelings that we talked about of, fear of engaging in this work, hesitancy engaging in this work, possible failure, right? The thing about equity work is that a lot of it does increase people's discomfort. That's a part of it, because inequality is comfortable for the people who are benefiting from it, okay? And the thing is that you are displacing their comfort for the comfort and the satisfaction of those employees that you have, that you're trying to reach, that you're trying to do better for. Typically, whoever your marginalized group is, that you're trying to center their experiences as well. So the fact that it causes some disruption, that it causes some feelings of not being comfortable, is a part of the work. But again, managers, workplaces, all of these things, that is a part of the process. And what we can vouch for, what Kris and I can vouch for, this is real testimony, secondhand from me, but real testimony from our clients, is that once you go through that process and your organization gets more comfortable with using terms of equity, with embedding equity language and equity messaging and interactions, it gets easier for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And so we just want to really encourage you that, just like switching over to that new software system is annoying and frustrating and aggravating at first, and everybody's complaining and using each other to figure it out. 6 months later, everybody is on the same. They're like, oh, actually, this is better. I can do this process better, hopefully, right? Yeah. So I just want to encourage you to kind of again be self-reflective and think about it that way. Kris.
Yeah, thanks, Kendra. Yeah, one other thing that we've talked about too is that, like with any other kind of change, good leadership, whatever your leadership structure looks like, having strong leadership that is trustworthy, that communicates well. We cannot or overstate the importance of communication throughout the entire process of doing equity work, communicating why you're doing it, how it's being done, who you're bringing in to do it, or who you're working with to do it. Communication is really vital to this work. And that comes from, leadership can be one person, it can be a team of people, but to have good leadership to kind of guide it along the way, and I think is really what can make a difference between getting people through when things get a little messy and making sure you get out on the other side of it. And then when you do have those moments where people go, forget this, too much is changing, people are upset, all these conversations are happening, and then leadership recoils and clams up, and then they stop the efforts and they say, well, we're not going to do that again for a while until another 5 years, and then it surfaces again, because it inevitably will. So a good leadership process, not even just a leader to put it in a role, but good leading, like a leadership process, I think is really vital to this work too.
Awesome. So I have so enjoyed this conversation.
It
was good to sit down with you, Kris, again, and have our conversations with Kris and Kendra, or Kendra and Kris, however we we promote it. But this was a fun topic, I think, but it's also a really, hopefully people will watch this and share this so they can get some insight, because this work is not this work takes work, but it's not anything to be afraid of. We do understand that retaliation is real. We understand that fear is real and things of that nature. But that's why hopefully you have a good network, a good support system, good management training, or you can bring in consultants like Kris and I to help you walk through those changes and those all of the things that come along, policy wise, practice wise, attitude wise, that goes along with equity and diversity training. So if you want to learn more about Work for Change, again, that is the workplace equity consultancy that supports this podcast. Please go to our handles are below. Linktree has all of the handles, but of course, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, all the places. So please like, subscribe, and share so that we can work to make the world of work better. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.